I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speaker for the first in Mark Twain Library's new series of programs called History Close to Home. Good evening to both our in-person and virtual audiences this evening. Our speaker tonight is Brent Colley, who will be delivering the talk entitled Reading's Native Americans and Early Settlers, It's Complicated. Brent is Reading's town historian, a role that he shares with Bruce Nelson. Brent grew up in Reading and comes from a family that called this town home for 5 generations. He credits his grandfather, Harry Colley, for instilling in him a curiosity and love for the town's past. In addition to creating the town's authoritative online resource, historyofreading.net, Colley leads walking tours, slideshows, and speaking engagements, both here in town and throughout the region. He also recently co-authored a book with Bruce entitled The Revolution Comes to Reading. We are quite fortunate that Brent is very generous in sharing his time and his extensive knowledge, especially considering that he also serves as first selectman in the town of Sharon, where he lives with his wife, Christine, and 3 kids. Just one quick note for our virtual audience. We will have a Q&A at the end of this program, so feel free to submit your questions at any time and we will address them at the end of this program. And also closed captioning is available for our virtual audience. Just click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. So please now join me in welcoming Brent Colley.
And thank you for having me. Obviously, this is my hometown and a place that I've always enjoyed giving talks to. It's a special place in my life, and the topic tonight is special as well because a lot of the information that I know on this topic is, a collaborative of sharing. Friends are great. Historian friends are the greatest. It makes for a really great dinner party or, just phone conversation. And Bruce would be here if he could, but he's doing history in other places. But, the whole concept and this concept of history close to home, I think is brilliant because this is the best place to have it. We're sitting now in the original Mark Twain Library. And the hope of Mark Twain was this. Obviously, he didn't get to see this, but this was his vision. And we've all, over the course of a decade, or not even decades, but a century, made it work. So I'm proud to be here to do this because for some strange reason, at some point in time, I always dreamed that I could be like Mark Twain. And here I am. So this is the Gene Clemens, Memorial Building, and I always park outside because of that. It's pretty cool. So what I put together here, and I don't give lectures, I have conversations. Obviously, welcome to everyone who's virtual. I think that's another neat thing that history has provided us is that now people that aren't here can be here. And there are a lot of people from all over the country and literally all over the world that are here. So we're going to go over a topic that Maggie and I have worked together for a long time. Maggie's back. Maggie is awesome. When Maggie left and went to Darien, we worked together. And I was happy to see her come back here because she is a talent and she is an asset that we're all going to enjoy. And this is part of like the concept of her and the committee to come up with history close to home. And this can become a lot more than, just tonight. It's going to move on. And the topics that we'll touch on, I asked her, and that's the other beauty. Like I said, having people that enjoy history as much as you do gives you the ability to work together. So she came up with the concept of, Native Americans and, Reading. And I said, can I zoom out? Meaning, can I tell you guys tonight the whole story? Like zoom out, like, so in Connecticut, it's a special story of people that were Europeans, Dutch, English, and many others that came here. And then can I bring it back to Connecticut? And then can we go forward in the future if people find that to be interesting? And she said, let's go. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. But let's just keep it to topic because I don't want to get off topic. So let's begin. So obviously, this is the map that really brought me and had me fall in love with the topic. This is a map that was made in the 1930s that showed where all the different tribes were in 1625. So you'll see the different tribes in their names, but you also see the villages, and you'll see the Pogasets and Ramapos. And this was Branchville, and this is Oblong. It's a little blurred, but Reading's right here. So you see where all the different tribes were in 1625. Matthes Spies was the man that gathered the information, and another gentleman made the map. Whatever, when you talk about, history and Indians and Native Americans in Connecticut, everyone comes to this map. If you love this map, it's really easy. Everyone knows how to use Google. Google Yukon plus magic. Magic is maps and geological information collections. And when you click on Connecticut, this is the first map. And you can download it as big as you want. And it's really neat to see the different tribes. The lines here depict state-owned boundaries. And you can see all the different towns, and it really plays a role in understanding, where these tribes were and who they were. And this is before Europeans really got here. So it's a neat resource. So this is where I fell in love with the topic. How do Europeans find Connecticut? Rivers. Rivers and trading were the big draw to Connecticut. Adrian Block is credited with finding us first. There may have been others, but he and the crews with him actually documented it. So he gets credit. So he comes to the Hartford area roughly in 1614. And he was following Henry Hudson. So he was heading to the Hudson area, and he was working for the Dutch, and he was looking for trading. Furs, like specifically beaver pelts, were very valuable back in Europe. He had made his fortune as an explorer. Actually, the first thing he did was he was a pirate. He took over a ship from Germany, and that's how he got rich. But then he, started working for the Dutch West Indian Company, and he eventually comes, and his main claim to fame is that when he came to our area, he started from roughly the Rhode Island area and went through Long Island. And up until that time frame, no one knew Long Island existed, and no one had mapped it. So he was the first to map Long Island Sound and Long Island, as well as the Connecticut River and other areas. The East River is another thing that he came through. So he made his way through the area and then up the Hudson. I think it's getting some water. You can hear my voice, right? Because this is the neat point about the whole trip. So he goes up the Hudson. He trades with Indians along the Hudson. And he gets pelts and furs, and he's got a really, really good boat full of stuff. They get back to like what we know as New York City today, and that ship with everything in it burns. And I don't know how, and I'll show you the picture. But this is the map that he made. So like, Reading in the current day is somewhere around here. But he was able to map our area, but no one had seen Long Island, and no one knew that Long Island Sound existed. And when he comes out of the Hudson with all that, the pelts and furs, he loses the ship. And unfortunately, also the documentation of everything else, because they rebuilt the ship somewhere around Manhattan by cutting down trees and building a boat. That's nuts. And apparently, from what I've read, no one knew how to build a boat, but they did. So the boat that they built is the one that comes up the Connecticut River, and they take the East River, and the East River is around like Randall Island and heading into, so it's coming through here. And I guess it was pretty tight in the day. They dynamited it later to make it bigger, but it was called Hell's Gate. So the thought process was that maybe he took that route because they weren't really that, I guess, they thought the boat was kind of shifty and maybe they'd be close enough to shore to make their way back. But that was the boat that made it up to Hartford. So that was the first view of Hartford. And later on, they would trade with the Indians in that area. And this is the modern depiction of that boat. But I don't know. I kind of throw the BS flag on it because they had to build it themselves. They cut down trees, and I don't know if no one knows how they did it, but that was the boat that made it to Hartford in the present day. So Adrian Block is a big part of the initial contact from Europeans to the New World, which is what we are. This is actually a sculpture in Hartford that explains that trip. And so that they definitely recognize the importance of that. And Connecticut is a tidal river, and so it's part saltwater and part freshwater, and he named it in his language as a freshwater. The Hudson's the same way. The Hudson River is really neat because up until Albany, Troy, the tides run back and forth. It's very difficult to navigate because even if you're in a kayak in the present day, the tides run back and forth. And then there's the winds. So, and he was following Henry Hudson. So it's just a neat connection in my mind. So after that, the Dutch established trading in the Hartford area. And for some reason, it doesn't seem as if the Indians in that location were very happy with the trading. So they thought about, all right, well, what if we bring in the English? That would kind of give them kind of a negotiation angle. So John Winthrop is up in Massachusetts. He writes that a podunk sachem on the River Connecticut asked him to come down and discuss English coming into their area. So that would give them the new angle. And that's in April of 1631. So this is the next level of European influence in Connecticut. And that's important because it didn't turn out to be a really good decision overall. So John Oldham and some companions come in 2 years later, and they have a very positive report for the people in Massachusetts. And that's that the sachem there, they treated them kindly. They were able to, be in Indian villages. It was a very positive experience. And they found some really good things that the English wanted, which was hemp and beaver and graphite. Graphite was like gold. It was similar to the English that the gold was to the Spanish at that moment in time. And they lodged in Indian villages all the time. And it was just a good experience. So that basically leads to 2 years later, a treaty from Roger Ludlow. Roger Ludlow is relevant to us because he's the one who eventually would gain lands in the coastal areas of our area, Norwalk, Fairfield. So he comes down with his members of the Dorchester Association, and that's 1635. Time frame is pretty interesting in this whole conversation. So this is his route. The other thing I liked about this map is that I looked at it with our current map. So I had this map, and then I had a map of Connecticut in the current day on the floor. And what I learned was that we used Indian routes, and maybe they weren't roads, but they were pathways. So routes 44, 197, 198, that's his route. That's how we got to Hartford. And I'll show you more about that later. And, again, these are all of our current roads. They all match up. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so that amplified my interest. Things got bad very soon. So the John Oldham, who originally came down to research what was in Hartford and Connecticut, is killed on Block Island. It's kind of ironic that Block Island, named after Adrian Block, is where he gets killed. So basically, the Narragansetts had murdered him, and there was 2 settlements in Connecticut, Hartford and Saybrook, and the Pequot War opens up for this reason. So you have 1631, 1636, and now things get interesting. So Wethersfield is where they're murdered. Saybrook is the other area. And then Roger Ludlow, declares an offensive war on the Pequots, which is strange because they had no involvement in the murder. And basically between the soldiers of the Massachusetts Bay and the Mohegans, which were probably in competition with the Pequots, they basically chased the Pequots all over Connecticut, and everything ends pretty horribly for them in Southport. That's where the final, basically, if not murders, were the war basically ends in Southport. And that's kind of like the trigger for all the coastal settlements for us. So this is how we gained settlements in Fairfield County. So right after the war, basically we take over the whole coastal areas. So, this would be like Bridgeport and Stratford. This is Fairfield, and this is Norwalk, and this is Greenwich. So all these areas are taken over soon after that conflict with the Pequots. And then the different dates that I have here shows when people actually came to settle. Norwalk was purchased but not settled until 1650. But still, the time frame is pretty interesting in terms of the Podunk Sachem says, let's can you come and visit us and see what you think in 1631, and here we go. The coastal regions are now settled by the Europeans that quickly. So obviously, the Indians are pushed inwards because we take over their lands. So they're displaced. So when you read the history of Reading or Weston or whomever, like, they say the Indians were displaced. Well, because we took them over in this time frame. What's really kind of interesting, though, is that it takes a long time for us to move inwards. So from 1639 to 1651, there's no English settlements in the interior of what we call Fairfield County. Derby was probably the first, 1651. Woodbury was 1672, and Danbury was 1684. That's so that's just, again, we use their trails to get here. And basically that would be a trail of Indians, initially, and then we widened it so now horses can go through, and then it gets wider, and the reason for that is for ox carts. So ox carts were just carts behind an ox and about the width of their backside. So what that means is that once we got to this, then you have interior settlements, because this was necessary to get settlers there. Because now we had the ability to move goods from the interior to, the ports of the coast. And Danbury was one of the first. This is just a notation from the General Assembly of Connecticut saying that in 1702, they don't have to pay certain rates because they are at a point now where they have a access from Danbury to the ports of Fairfield and Norwalk. That route is Umpqua Road in the present day. This is an ox cart, just so you can see the ox cart is just a little bit bigger than the ox's backside, but that was very important. And there was no bridges. So when they traveled across, it was either what's called a ford. A ford is just a low point in a river or a stream, or they would use a ferry, and a ferry would just be kind of a boat that takes them across.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Is there any reason why we have to have the microphone right in front of the screen?
I can move it.
Thank you.
Is that better? That's why we have the conversation, right? So yeah, so that's the transition, from just a path to a bridle path to this. But what's really kind of like what really stuck out to me about this is that if you really think about it, it's the time frame, because Derby was 12 years, Woodbury was 33 years, and Danbury was 44 years before. So the interior settlements were on the coast, and the Indians that were pushed inwards had this amount of time without us here. I mean, obviously, we probably interacted with them in some way, shape, or form because trading was big. But that's a lot of years. And that's the thing that, in the present day, we always think about history, but we don't think about the timelines. So that's pretty interesting to me. And it must have been very confusing for the Native Americans at that timeline, because, yes, things probably were terrible when the Europeans came and pushed them inside, but that's a lot of time.
Can I ask a quick question? Does that indicate like a generational, so the kids get older and then they need their own land so that they?
Not necessarily. No, it was transportational. Like the transportation didn't improve for that amount of time. So once the transportation changes, then that's when we come in. But it took the transportation to make that change. But that's a decent amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been first selectman for 9.5 years. It feels like 27 years.
So did the fact that New Netherlands claimed all the way to the Connecticut River have anything to do with it?
I don't like, so there was a treaty in 1650 where they split things up. So Netherlands got all the way from, we'll say Fairfield to New York City, and then the English got everything from here to, Rhode Island. I don't know if that played a role. It was just kind of like one of those things where it's a compromise for them as far as trading goes. But no, anything that has to do with the interior and things moving forward was all transportation. So once the transportation was improved, then you saw people move in. And like, that's where we're kind of getting into. But it's a, for anyone who's, just us, I mean, 45 years, I'm 52. Like, imagine if you were in Danbury and all of a sudden now settlers are coming in, you'd say like, what's going on? I mean, obviously these lands were traded for with goods, goods that were really good for the individuals that were making these transactions. A stone axe, for instance. So like Indians had stone axes. Stone axe basically isn't very effective. I think it takes at least 3 weeks or maybe more to pound on a tree and eventually kill the tree. But it's a long period. I don't know if it's 3 weeks or 3 months. But if you were given a stone axe, or excuse me, a steel axe, it would take you 3 days, if that, maybe less. So like the goods that were being traded for land or land access, we're going to get into that, were very attractive to the Indians. And I'll show you examples of that as we move forward. So basically what you have here is pioneer settlements and then settlements that result after the success of those settlements. So Danbury would be a pioneer, Southbury, Woodbury, Derby, and then all of us are just basically settlements that happen soon after. And the interesting thing about that is that once these success stories happen, so we said Danbury was like 1702, then you have interest because now we can get access to the interior. And so then you see them resurveying the boundaries. And when that happens, a lot happens because now what we thought was real is not real, and things change again. So it's a good indication of the pioneers and the settlements and how things move forward very quickly. Indians that were trading land or bargaining for different items didn't understand ownership the way that the Europeans did. It wasn't necessarily ownership. It was more or less like a land lease, because how they operated was that you could use multiple parcels of land for the same reason. Like you could do, like maybe one parcel was fishing and, but I can hunt here, or you can plant here. Like it was more of like a partnership with the land. So, it all depended on how you're using it was how that they bartered for the usage. So the mindset, the viewpoint was different from Indians to Europeans, and that's important. William Cron, Changes in the Land. That book is awesome. Read it. It's basically the Bible of what was happening when the Europeans met the Native Americans. And what he noted, it was that what the Indians owned or had claim to was not the land, but the things that were on the land during various seasons of the year. In this, nothing is more clear than the names that they attach to the landscape. And so I grabbed a couple names that you guys could recognize locally. So when you look at maps and you see names, like these are the names. So, Abessa, the clam-bake place, a Simpog, the beaver pond, Warmog, good fishing place. Warmog is in New Preston. It's still a great fishing place. Pequannock, the small plantation. So, in Housatonic, land behind, beyond the mountains. I live in Sharon now, and that is true. So this is how they named their things, and this kind of gives you an indication of how they viewed the land and landscape. And we're talking like about people that have been using this land and sharing this land for thousands of years. I mean, Reading, based on carbon dating, roughly like 8,000 years of people being here from the natives, across from Richfield High School, like 12,000 years. Up in Lake Warmup, same thing, 12,000 years. Like they use the land correctly, and I mean, what, Reading's what, 255 years old? I mean, we got to think about that. And so that's the really interesting thing about that. And I think that's the cool thing about this topic. So getting into the deeds, so land transactions, and basically, the Indians, and the truth about what Indians thought they were doing and what was not happening really. This is Umpqua, and this is 1686. And they reserved the right in the deed for the liberty of hunting upon said lands for themselves and the witness of all. And not only did they say this in the deed, I mean, I only have so much space in these slides, but also they only gave us half of Umpqua Pond. So they knew that they wanted to still use Umpqua Pond. So in the deed, it only says half of Umpqua Pond. So, and the other thing too that we have to consider is that, the Indians aren't writing these deeds. They're relying on a conversation with, European lawyers, but it's actually getting into the text. So this is the first one, and this is Umpqua, and 1686 is pretty early. And then this is the last one that I have access to. It's Captain Couch to Chickens, and that's 1724. And that one is more direct and exact. Reserving in the whole of the same liberty for myself and my heirs to hunt, fish, and gallop on land and watershed. So for not only himself, but his children and his grandchildren, and it goes on and on and on. So there's a point where, so in this deed, Chickens was only thinking that he was going to give Couch a couple hundred acres. Well, what he was actually doing in this deed was giving Couch the entire acreage of what was called the peculiar or the oblong, and that really ticked him off, and you can see why. He wasn't giving it away; he was giving access. So that's really the key concept, not only in Reading, but overall. There was a misconception, but also we have to consider that the Indians aren't writing these deeds, but they're relying on Europeans to write them for them and give them deeds to sign. The other thing, and this is the most important thing, is that when Roger Ludlow purchased Fairfield, we're included. So Reading doesn't become Reading for a long time. She done this garnish, 1767. So that's when we become, but this is the map where we show that we have Danbury, Bethel. So when the boundaries are surveyed in 1709, what they find is that there is a void of land here that they didn't know about. And that amount of land is thousands of acres. So that's basically, we know what the present day is Cross Highway. So this would be Cross Highway. Everything above it was vacant land. Land that was unclaimed, land that we didn't know existed. And that really brings into the complications, because that's a lot of acreage. I think Reading in the current day is 32 miles, and that equals 20,000 something acres. I'm not a mathematician, so anyone here can call me on that. But yeah, that's so the whole Cross Highway to Danbury Bethel was open land. And, basically the complication on top of that was that the Toleration Act was passed in that same time frame. So now other religions are allowed to practice in Connecticut. So below that was all the Puritans, we call them probably Congregationalists in the current day, but at that time frame, like the Fairfield long lots, which weren't really settled, which ran from Cross Highway down to Fairfield, but now the Anglicans can come. Like there's open space for them to come. And this image here, which is rough. So this is the Church of England, which is the Anglicans. And this is Native Americans. So the concept for them at this moment in time, I think this image was created in 1704, was to have, basically a way to come and work with the Indians and others that didn't, agree with the Puritans. So now the complication doubles because John Reed resigns as the congregational minister because he's at that moment in time up in, he was in Stratford at the moment, but then he would move to Milford. So in March of 1707, he's accused that he's become an Anglican and he's moved out of Stratford. So it's like, that's why like Maggie's great, because she allowed me to put, it's complicated because it really is complicated. And there's a lot of topics. And that's why I think like this concept for this talk is so great, because we can, if you guys are interested in anything about this talk, we can broaden it. So after this, Anglicans begin to negotiate Indian deeds in what's known as the peculiar, the oblong, the vacant lands. So you have settlements. So like if Lone Town would be here, I forgot, I got the point. So Lone Town would be here, and then Reading Ridge would be over here, and we start to see like land deeds being made in these areas. So and they're all Anglicans. So obviously there was a theme going on that they realized that this land was available and that they could settle here, and they were kind of hopeful that they could have their own, utopia, I guess is the best word for it. And that then we get into the present day. So this is basically from 1720. So you could have your own religion and practice your own way, but you still had to pay state taxes. So this was the General Assembly of Connecticut asking them to submit a list of neighbors.
They wanted the taxes because the taxes went to support the Congregational Puritan Church.
Right.
The Anglicans did not want to support a Congregational Church.
Right, but it makes sense. I mean, but that was the whole thing. But the beauty of it is that we now know some of the settlers that were here. So you had Isaac Hall, you had Samuel Hall, Moses Knapp, and there's probably likely more. But we know that there definitely was settlement here in the Reading Ridge and Lone Town area. Strangely enough, with that whole topic is that, John Reed moves here in 1711, and in 1712, the General Court basically orders that all the vacant lands between Danbury and Fairfield, not taken up by settlers, should go to, basically an auction. But that never takes place until 1722. So meanwhile, all these settlers obviously settle here, and that doesn't take place. Nathaniel Gold was the brother-in-law of John Reed. And obviously they didn't want the Anglicans here. And they auctioned off all the land without the knowledge of the people that are living in, Reading Ridge and Lone Town in Fairfield. So that gets it even more complicated because now all the land has been sold. there's a deed made by Chickens for the land as well. And that's why you see there was an earnest prayer, which was that John Reed and all the others that were living there basically asked the General Assembly to say, this is not good. And you know, they kind of worked an angle about Chickens because Chickens didn't think that he sold all the land. He thought he sold like 200-300 acres. So he's not happy. And a part of it, and I broke it out just so, because it's long, you know, Chicken, the Indian living near many of us, believe him that he was sell a small quantity of land, 200-300 acres, but in the deed to Captain Couch, the whole of the land is comprehended, so it's all sold. And when the Indian heard of it, he was greatly enraged. So now they humbly beg that the sale be not confirmed because they fear, you know, that he's gonna, you know, there'll be bloodshed, or, you know, so this was their angle, but that wasn't the case at all. What ended up was that the land was gone. And, you know, basically we had, it all worked out. So you had Anglicans and you had Puritans living together in Reading. And that was not a bad thing. It was actually not a problem at all. The Anglican Church, you know, happened at the corner of Cross Highway, Churchill, and Black Rock, and everything really went well up until the Revolutionary War. Because, you know, if you were of the Church of England or Anglican, you were seen as a loyalist and against the cause for revolution. So, but up until then, like, there wasn't really that many issues. But again, like, it was a complicated matter, but it also makes Reading unique from any other town in our area. There's not many towns at all, even in Connecticut, that had two religious groups working together for a long period of time. And that over the course of time has proven true overall. Georgetown had 5 churches in 1 square mile. And, you know, they're all different. And it was all about, you know, who was there and who was working together. So, you know, we live in a pretty special place, just to, you know, broaden it again. And religion is a big part of our town. And it's neat. I think that's one of the things that I really think that's special, is that we have had so many different religions in the same town, and it started from the very beginning. So this is the deed, Chickens to read. This is 1714, and obviously John Reed got here 1711. This is the final deed. What's beautiful about the deed is that you'll see, you know, Sam Mohawk and Chickens on the deed. Reed was and would become one of the most important lawyers in New England. He's, you know, basically credited with being like the father of modern American lawyers. And Chickens was, and we're about to get into that, was special too. What's also neat is that there was more than one John Reed and there was more than one Chickens. Yeah, it's been fun. But like I said, friends are great. Historian friends are awesome. And I know Stuart Reeve and I know Kathleen Van, and they share their information freely. And that's where I gained, you know, the knowledge of this, and really got a better understanding of, because I was always confused. I mean, obviously I started my website, History of Reading, 1997 or 8. And I was basically just transcribing what, you know, Charles Bertod had written. and teaching myself how to make a website. And that knowledge was all that I had. And then, but I was always so confused about chickens and reed, and it just seemed like there was more to the story. And that's what it really comes down to. And that's kind of like, I think, like I said, like this concept for history close to home is great because we can explore it further. What relationship did John Reed and chickens truly have? They were both, well, there was obviously the next topic is how many were there? They were kind of one and the same. They were really into real estate, and they were really cultural brokers in a lot of different ways. Obviously, we touched on it with Reed, like he's a minister, and then he switches to Anglicanism, and then all of a sudden he's a lawyer, and he founds New Milford. So this is the beauty of like the present day. I wasn't sure if I can keep it in my mind because, like I said, it's new information. So, aha. All right, so I can give it to you right now. So he's a Puritan minister from 1701 to 1707. Then he's defending Indian deeds in New Milford from 1706 to 1710. And then he's converting to the Church of England in 1707, licensed as an attorney in 1708. He's a proprietor in Newtown, 1708 as well, and a proprietor in New Fairfield, 1710, and then settles Lonetown, Reading, 1711. And then he writes a deed to Lonetown Manor with chickens, 1714. And then he becomes the Massachusetts equivalent of a land proprietor in 1716. And he is elected Attorney General of Massachusetts in 1721. He starts the New England Current with the Franklins, Ben and his father, or his brother, with John Chetley. John Chetley is also really interesting. So in 1720, John Chetley writes a letter to John Reed asking if he can find any stone tools and asking if Chickens has some. So John Chetley could be considered one of the earliest archaeologists. And then obviously attorney for Yale, and then moves to Boston, but also like is basically staying relevant to us. And then he becomes an Indian agent for chickens in 1725. So Chickens, number two, was looking to, around that time frame, the Chickens family had grown to about 20 people. So things were really changing in our area, especially our town. So they needed a reservation or a place to go. And so he's lobbying for chickens. I came across a deed of 1721 in my research for this talk that the Reeds purchased land in Kent a mile from my house to provide for chickens and a reservation. So it was 200 acres in Kent to provide, I guess, a transition from the 100 acres that chickens had here. I had not read that. So this talk, I learned that. And so it's kind of interesting. And then, so that was 1741, 1748 is when Chickens transitions to Scotticoke and Kent. And soon after that, Chickens passes on. and soon after that, John Reed the first passes on. So there was a really interesting correlation in their lives and also in their relationship. On top of that, Chickens, two of Chickens, his daughter and son went to work for John Reed. And Kate ended up marrying John Reed's servant, Andrew. They had 11 kids. And so there was that. And that topic is, there's a lot in that topic, but like it's so you can tell that, and because, if you think about it from an Indian perspective, you want a betterment for your family. And so working for the Reeds would make sense. Tom Warrups would work with Zalman Reed and later go on and, from Reading, go into the Continental Army, and he lived in Kent as well. So yeah, so they were definitely intertwined, whether it's positive or negative. I mean, it's just, it's your opinion. And I don't think we really know all the facts, but it'd be a great thing moving forward to understand better, I think, as a historian. So on top of that, so how many Reeds, how many Chickens? So as far as Reeds go, like three that are relevant. So John 1 and John 2, in this time frame that we're speaking of, are the most relevant. So there was John 1 that was, the founder and everything else, and John 2 is mostly known in the records as Colonel Reed. So
son?
Yeah, yep, all sons. They named a lot of Reeds. So John 2 takes over for his dad. And then there's John 3 and 4, and then there's another John Reed. They married into the Hill family, so there's a John Reed Hill, and so there's a lot of different John Reeds. I think everyone was named.
They were all direct thing. Not,
it was all direct.
There could be cousins. You might have John Reed and John Reed. John Reed Sr. might be a cousin to John Reed Jr.
But no, the direct lineage, yeah.
Because sometimes that's the way.
No, 1, 2, and 3.
People would look at records to identify the John Reed there versus the John Reed here.
So Stuart Reeve is the expert on John Reed, and he did a lot of work for the Hill family. And so, yeah, 1, 2, and 3 are the most relevant in the time frame that we're talking about tonight for the Reeds. There was 4 or 5 heading, and probably more because a lot of them were named John Reed by their family members. But yeah, 1, 2, and 3 are probably the most relevant. Chickens, this is again something that I want to get right, because this comes from Stuart Reeve and Kathleen Boniana, and I didn't know this. My dad didn't know this. My dad was really psyched, so that was cool. So the Chickens family. So Old Chickens was born roughly 1645. He signed Fairfield deeds from 1672 to 1684 in Westchester, probably Katona area, Ridgefield, and also signed not only deeds but documents between 1683 and 1720. Chickens, our Chickens that we mostly know, alias Sam Mohawk. Fairfield deeds, Reading deeds, 1689 to 1748. Warrups, alias Chickens, haha, how about that? I mean, you can see the confusion. So Warrups, alias Chickens, Reading documents in 1748. That document may have been the transition to Kent, who knows, passes in 1763, and then Tom Warrups, alias Chickens or Warrups, born 1739, and he dies after 1789, and he's probably the one that was in the Revolutionary War. So,
so the Chickens who was in Katona and also here. So was he a chief, a sachem of that? Was it the same person, same Chickens? Or are we talking about 3 or 4 different Chickens here there
For-
everywhere.
No, he was definitely involved in Katona. I think the old chickens that they mentioned in Westchester is that.
So he
um,
must have been somebody important.
They
If,
really,
if he was over the whole area as opposed to one person who just had one little area.
no, and I think that generationally, that knowledge of land transaction was passed on. I think that's pretty much what you're having here. John Reed had that knowledge and the Chickens family had that knowledge, whatever you call them, but it was obviously passed on. So, whether he was a signer or a witness in the documents and the deeds, the Chickens were involved and that moved on for a good period of time. And I think that's why, in terms of, Native American, individuals, Chickens is important, as a family, because they were cultural brokers, really. They obviously understood land usage and transactions. And that's why they show up in like so many different towns. Like there's chicken rocks or references to chickens in all of our local towns. I mean, I had a Warrup Rocks. I live on Peaceable Street. That's where I grew up. There's Chicken Rock there. There's a Chicken's Rock in Ridgefield at Great Pond. I mean, like, it's amazing the references and the locations. But that just proves that, obviously you have now, you have 4. I didn't know that there was 4, but that just proves like their influence.
So maybe it was a clan and not a family.
Well, I think it was a family.
Is it possible that the chickens, or however they got their name, didn't really have this land? They just like the Indians they could find, say, hey, you're willing to sign this? Oh, come over here, sign this. Oh, great. Can you come sign this? We bought this from the Indians because we got this people named Chickens who are willing to sign, and we've trained them over generations to sign. Therefore, we're getting them access and things, and they're signing away things that may not even be theirs. Just because they're the ones who are like, oh, this is what we do. We put our name here and we agree with these white people. We get their tools and whatever they want to give us. And the rest of the Indians, well, they're not chickens.
Well, I think like the only difference is that like he lived here and he was respected here. So he was known. So obviously, but he did have a really good knowledge of lands that were available. I think what happened when the Europeans showed up on the shores was that they got pushed in and certain individuals came to learn where the vacant lands were and what they could do. Because even when he went to Kent, obviously he passed away, but his family members found vacant land in Kent, and there's land that they were able to obtain there. It was like a knowledge base, but we're talking like, you always got to think about the time. He starts in like the 1680s, and he's transitioning with us like in the 1711, 12, and so he can pass that knowledge on. But there's actually a place in Kent that he took on that was vacant too. I think it's called Preston Hill, and there's a cave, and inside it there's a W. Unfortunately, I can only visit it in the wintertime because it's the rattlesnake capital of the Northwest. Yes, Maggie.
Did anybody ever say where the name came from?
Chickens, they believe in terms of the language at that it would have been. It means hatchet, and that's like and like Mohawk may have come out of like the same thing. Like it's it's relevant, whether, but chickens is Wampano, I believe, is the language, and it means hatchet. So that's research that Stu and Kathleen did.
The 200-acre parcel of land that you mentioned that was given to chickens to compensate for 100 acres, that transaction that took place here in Reading that he did not fully understand at the time. Is that Native American?
Yeah, no, it is.
And Sharon along with 7.
It's like just to the right of Bull's Bridge.
Yeah.
Let me, hang on. So I saved it. again, the power of technology, right?
It's on the map. but
All
I
right, so
don't know
I will give you
exactly.
the text, and this is from the history of New Milford. An Indian deed has been seen in the land records at Hartford, showing that Mr. Reed made a purchase of the land of Mawehu and others at the mouth of the 10 Mile River, which is Bull's Bridge. And it says me Wahoo, Tom Cookson, James Wahoo, Conus, Indians of all the Scotticook, sell to John Reed 200 acres on land on the Stratford River, which the Housatonic leads to Stratford, and at a place called Sastuck, northward from place where the 10 Mile River falls into the Great River. And this was in July of 1741.
Okay, so that is the spot. You can actually drive up to the edge of it.
Yeah, and then he went from there, but no, it's yeah, no, it's a great place. It's a gravel road now. If you like to bike or mountain bike, it's a great place to ride.
Would you care to, can you speak about Little Egypt?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Because that's apparently, I understand it's a down 58 towards Weston on the east side, which was possibly a Native American community. And
They
probably was used as a pejorative word by the whites.
No, and like I said, like that's the beauty tonight. Like if this is a topic that we want to explore, we can explore it. Stuart Reeve and Kathleen Banyana could definitely help with that. But yeah, no, I know where it is, but off the top of my head, I can't give you data that's relevant.
And the other thing, I know of a person here who grew up, who is descended from the Native American community. And she and her family were Anglicans. They went to Christ Church. So do you know anything about whether or not the Native Americans went Puritan or Anglican or, as they transitioned?
So our locals went Moravian. So, when he was in Kent, one of the Warrups, actually, so in my town of Sharon, Connecticut, at Indian Lake, there was a Moravian mission, and the Moravians were headquartered in Pennsylvania. And so, the Warrups were involved in that, and a lot of them were. But Anglicans did want to convert Native Americans to their culture, but Moravians are probably the most well-known religious group that worked with the Indians.
Except the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, the SPG, the Anglicans, they were sent
For that, so
for
that
the
was the whole purpose.
of Christianizing the native population.
Right, and that may have been a connection, like, no one has really kind of explored that. But it makes sense, I mean, if you think about it, we have the peculiar, the Oblong, and you have Native American Indians and Anglicans together in that same land, that would,
And
but,
I know
I
that
mean-
because the church, Trinity Episcopal Church in Newtown, the first minister, John Beach, who was also the first minister
Here,
here, was supported by the SPG.
yeah, no, it makes sense. So, yeah, that's like a topic that no one's really looked into, but it's a good topic.
Brent, I think we have to move on to the Q&A.
Sure, yeah, the people from the outside world, that's cool.
Did you have something else?
No, it's good, like I said,
That's great.
it's a rare knowledge, and that's a Mark Twain quote, so relevant, right?
So, and I just want to let the virtual audience know to please submit your questions to the Q&A, and then we will ask Brent the questions. So I have a quick question before we get to everybody's question. So we thought that we hit maybe PR goal with the town's name, maybe was reading, or was it pronounced reading now before,
When you look at the colonial records. It's spelled with two E's and an EA. I mean, there's a lot of different, thoughts on that.
Right.
But yeah, it eventually came down to Reading being with an A. But yeah, I've seen it both, like what I just read to you. They wrote John Reed with two E's.
Okay.
So it could have been either way.
So we've had a couple questions. So, this topic, it's complicated, right? So, and have you noticed a reluctance of some historians to broach the topic because of the current climate that we're living in, and being careful about, the language and things like that? I mean, and have you noticed that? And if so, do you think it's stopping historians from even broaching a topic like this? And if that's the case, then what do we lose?
I don't think so. I think it's a good topic. I think anyone who really wants to understand Native Americans in general goes to Washington Depot / Roxbury to the American Indian Institute. Not only is that museum fantastic, but they also have forums where Native Americans come and speak to you, or just speak to themselves, and you can listen. And I was always interested in the topic of Native American burials and burial grounds and mounds of stone, and they don't talk about that. But like once I went to there and listened to the forum, I understand why. Like it's just they're kind of protecting, they don't want people to dig them up to find things and things of that nature. But no, I think the topic is a good one to look at because, it's like I said, it's complicated. The Europeans came here and because if you think about it, they had some really neat stuff, whether it be like iron tools or even a telescope. I mean, think about how cool that is. Like I look at it like this, like, if mine is so I'm just in the present day and I'm mowing my lawn with like a 12-inch, hand push mower. And then my neighbor shows up with a John Deere riding mower that cuts, 40 inches. I'm like, what the heck did you get that from? Oh, well, these guys down by the river gave it to me, and all I gotta do is, and I'm like, oh my God, like, let's go. Like, you can see like, how, because like I said, with the stone tools, they're pounding on trees for like 8 hours a day for weeks. I mean, and you're just trying to get that tree into submission. And then your neighbor comes, with a steel axe and he cuts down the tree in a couple hours. Like, they're like, where'd that come from? Or you think about a telescope, it's like they come in and they're like, you got to see this. And then you look at it, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, where'd you get that? All they want is beaver skins. You're like, what? Beaver skin? I got tons of beavers. And you got to think about like in that time frame, the beavers were ginormous. They were like the size of like black labs. And they were really, really, really valuable in Europe. And like to them, the Europeans, I mean, the Native Americans, it was like for my dirty socks, you want this, I can get this, like, cool. I mean, I manage beavers all the time because that's part of my job. They multiply. And so like, you got to think about like, it was, but it caused problems because, once all these neat things came into play, steel goods, whatever they would be, or anything, like now you had Native Americans and different tribes competing for the trade, and also drawing them to the shores or the rivers, because that's where you'd find the Europeans. And the other issue, the negative issue, was that the Europeans were bringing diseases that they never experienced. So now they're dying off, but they want the goods. So they're coming. And unfortunately, it's destroying who they are. And, you have to respect a people that's been here for 8,000, 12,000, 16,000 years. That's crazy. And that's the other topic.
There are two more virtual questions, and then the audience also would like to ask. I don't know how to pronounce this, but was chickens part of the Skachiko tribe? Is that?
So we really don't know. I mean, there's so many different stories. I mean, just Google chicken warps. I mean, there's so many different opinions. I stick with the people that, have looked at the documentation and the Indian records. We don't know. We believe that he started in the Fairfield area, if not the Fairfield, then the Stratford area.
Okay. And then the last question is, where did all the rock walls come from that span through many of the forests around Reading, especially on Reading Ridge? There seem to be many.
Land clearing, along roads. I mentioned that you went from like a pathway to a bridle path to an ox cart. They were clearing rocks in that process. But yeah, I mean, rocks obviously here are, they're not rare. And, whether they use them for, basically just clearing lands, or most every land record has a mention of a stone pile or thing like that. I mean,
This was all farmland
yeah,
from the 1700s up into the early 1900s,
Yeah.
when it started becoming estates, I suppose.
yeah. And that was just rocks. I mean, and when you farm, like, you grow rocks. Yes.
I was under the impression a lot of the land in the Oblong was not really suitable for farming, that it was used more for dairy or
Farming or dairy, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true.
livestock.
No, I mean, yeah, that would make sense. I think, the attraction to our area for anyone, so the plantation originally in our region was for some reason, what we know as Danbury, and obviously on the shores. But the attraction, and it makes sense for us, is that, before the Europeans established themselves here, you had free runs of fish and eel. And obviously, also the Indians that lived here were very good about maintaining the undergrowth and controlled burning. And what the controlled burning would provide is sweet grasses and fruits, and that would bring in deer and other animals that you could hunt. So, if you got here, there was an abundance of food. That's why the Indians that gave the deed for Umpqua wanted half of it, because food. I grew up in Georgetown, just above the Branchville train station. The amount of eel that came in and out of there was out of control. We would catch them all the time. My best friend was Mike DeLuca, and Bruno DeLuca, who owned DeLuca Hardware, loved eel. We didn't like eel because eel had like the strongest jaws like you could ever believe. So we just tossed them on Route 7 and then we bring them back, and then they were fine. And then we could take the hook out and keep on going. And then we bring them to Bruno. And he'd be like, I don't know what you guys are fetching, but these are the best eel I've ever had. He never knew. But that just goes, the Norwalk River was full of eel. And that's, even if you go to New Milford, where Lover's Leap is, that's totally changed. But not only eel, but lamprey. And lamprey are like an eel, but just a little bit bigger and different. And that was really important to the Native Americans. And that's why Warramog is just above that. And that's why it's called the good fishing place. So, but that was the difference. I mean, once we started establishing dams, then those fish didn't make their way like they did. But you didn't really need, plantations here, because you had an abundance of other foods. Yes, sir.
Do we know how many Indian burial grounds are in Reading and where they're located?
No.
I know one is off of the Black Rock Turnpike, which is actually in Easton. It's marked on a Rand McNally.
But yeah, no, overall, like I said, I went to these forums at the Indian Institute, and they don't talk about it.
For a particular reason.
They don't want people to explore them. but it makes sense.
So I moved here from Green's Farms, and I was under the impression that Chicken Warrups had come from there and settled here after he sort of sold up.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of rumors, but and he definitely, he had some connection there, for sure, like Green's Farms. You have like a, I don't know if it's a park, or there's some place where that,
Park.
yeah, and like there's, you know, that he named it, and things like that,
That's
yeah.
what I've heard.
And, but yeah, he was, and then there's a rumor that he had, you know, come from what we know is Katona now, because he apparently had married the Sachem's daughter there, and then made his way to Fairfield. So, yeah, like, it's a neat topic. Like I said, like, I know more now because my friends have shared me information, but if that's important, like, that's why we're here. Like, you know, that's like, the thing is like, you know, now, like, I'm your town historian and Bruce is my, you know, my co-part, and we want to know what you want to know. I mean, history is all about what's relevant. I cut my teeth in Meadow Ridge, and I got beat up pretty good one night. I had an individual come up and she said, you give good information and I like your pictures, but you talk too fast and you share too much, and you need to realize, so what, who cares? And here I am. I'm always thinking, so what, who cares?
All right, I have one last question. Go ahead. No, I don't want to be the last person. That seems unfair. Where did I was also under the impression that Chicken Warrups settled in sort of where the country club is now, or sort of where Warrups Farm is.
Yeah, so it's named like Wolf's Ridge. So if you were, so the country club and Highstead is the, and then to the cemetery, in where the Putnam Park enters, that whole ridge was his.
Okay.
It may have extended into the country club. And then you had Tom Warrups, who worked with Zalman Reed. And so they were all along that area. But that is where, if you look at the old documentation, that ridge, that whole ridge was theirs.
Thanks.